Imagine having more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes. Private jets. Mansions on 3 continents. A team of 100 people whose only job is to make your life easier. Now imagine that none of it, not one single dollar of it, can save your life in the one moment that actually matters. This is the story of a billionaire named Richard Hale, and the quiet, unnoticed bodyguard who saved him. Not with money. Not with power. With something money can never buy. By the end of this video, you will understand why the richest man in the room is often the most alone, and why the person standing silently behind him might be the only one who truly has his back. If you enjoy real stories about loyalty, courage, and the hidden side of wealth, stay until the end, because this story has a twist you will not see coming. Let's begin. Richard Hale was 48 years old, and he had built one of the largest technology companies in the country from nothing but a small apartment and a broken laptop. By the time he turned 40, his name was on magazine covers. Forbes called him a genius. Investors called him at 3 a.m. just hoping he would answer. His company employed over 20,000 people across 12 countries. But there was a side to Richard's life that the magazines never wrote about. The threats. When a man becomes that wealthy, that visible, that powerful, he stops being just a businessman. He becomes a target. Rivals wanted to destroy him. Extremists wanted to make an example of him. And some people simply wanted what he had, and didn't care how they got it. So, like most billionaires at his level, Richard had a security team. Drivers who studied alternate routes every single day. Analysts who watched his digital footprint. And one man who never left his side. His name was Daniel Cross. Daniel Cross was not the kind of man you would remember if you passed him on the street. That was exactly the point. He was in his late 30s, quiet, broad-shouldered, always dressed in a plain dark suit that made him blend into every hallway, every elevator, every restaurant. He rarely spoke unless it mattered. He rarely smiled. But his eyes never stopped moving. Before working for Richard, Daniel had served 8 years in an elite military unit, followed by 4 more years in close protection work for diplomats in unstable regions. He had seen things most people only see in movies. He didn't talk about them. When Daniel was first interviewed for the job, the head of Richard's security team asked him only one real question. If it came down to it, his life, or yours, what would you choose? Daniel didn't hesitate. That's not really a choice. That's the job. He got hired that same day. For 3 years, Daniel walked 2 steps behind Richard, everywhere. Board meetings. Airports. Restaurants. Family dinners. He memorized every exit in every building Richard entered. He knew which staff members were new, which cars didn't belong on the street, which strangers lingered a little too long. Richard, to be honest, barely noticed him. Not out of disrespect, simply because that is what wealth does to a person over time. When you have people around you every day whose entire job is invisibility, you stop seeing them as people. You start seeing them as furniture. Richard would walk past Daniel every morning with a quick nod, sometimes not even that. He knew Daniel's name. He didn't know Daniel's story. That was about to change. 6 months before the night that would change everything, Richard's company announced a merger that would put nearly $2 billion into his personal accounts, and put thousands of jobs at competing companies at risk. Most people saw a smart business deal. One man saw the destruction of everything he had built. His name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is what he became. A mid-level executive at a rival company, he lost his position, his reputation, and eventually his family, as the fallout from the merger spread through his life like a slow fire. Grief and anger have a way of turning into something darker when they're left alone too long. Somewhere in the months that followed, this man stopped blaming the market, stopped blaming bad luck, and started blaming one single person. Richard Hale. He began following news about Richard's public appearances. He studied interviews. He learned his schedule. Nobody around Richard noticed, Because nobody was looking for a threat that didn't look like a threat. He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't on any watch list. He was just a man who had lost everything, and decided one night that he had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, Daniel Cross noticed something the algorithms and analysts missed. A car. The same dark sedan, 3 times in 2 weeks, parked at different locations Richard visited. Different plates each time, which told Daniel immediately this was not a coincidence. Random people don't switch license plates. He flagged it to the security team. They ran the numbers, found nothing conclusive, and moved on. Daniel didn't move on. He never did. It was a Thursday evening in late autumn. Richard was scheduled to give a keynote speech at a technology summit downtown, followed by a private dinner with investors at a rooftop restaurant. The event ran long. By the time it ended, the sky was fully dark, and the after-dinner crowd had thinned to a small group heading toward the private elevator. Richard, 2 of his executives, and Daniel walking his usual 2 steps behind. That's when Daniel saw him. A man in a dark coat, standing near the parking structure exit, not moving with the flow of the crowd. Everyone else was walking toward their cars or waiting for a rideshare. This man was standing still, watching. His hand stayed inside his coat pocket the entire time, a small detail, but to a man trained the way Daniel was trained, it was the loudest signal in the world. Daniel didn't say a word. He simply shifted his position, placing his body slightly ahead of Richard, angling him subtly away from the man's direct line of sight, guiding the group toward a different exit without anyone else even realizing it had happened. For a moment, it seemed like the danger had passed. Then the man moved. He crossed the open space quickly, closing the distance in seconds, his hand coming out of his coat. Later, Daniel would say that in that moment, there was no fear. There was no time for fear. There was only reaction, years of training compressing into a single heartbeat. Daniel stepped fully in front of Richard. What happened next lasted less than 4 seconds, but it would be talked about for years inside that company. Daniel closed the distance himself instead of waiting to be reached, driving forward and taking the man to the ground before the weapon in his hand could be raised into position. In the struggle, Daniel took a hard blow meant for Richard's chest, a wound to his side that would later require emergency surgery. But the attacker was down, disarmed, restrained. And Richard Hale, the man with $2 billion incoming, 3 homes, and a name on the cover of Forbes, stood completely untouched, shaking, alive, because a man he barely knew had just chosen to stand between him and death without a single second of hesitation. Police arrived within minutes. Richard rode in the ambulance with Daniel, refusing to leave his side, holding a hand that had just saved his life, saying nothing, because for the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. Daniel spent 11 days in the hospital. Richard visited every single one of them. Not as a boss checking on an employee. As a man beginning to understand something about his own life that all his success had somehow never taught him. During those visits, they talked, really talked, for the first time in 3 years. Richard learned that Daniel had a daughter he rarely got to see because his job required him to be available every hour of every day. He learned that Daniel had turned down 2 higher-paying security jobs at other companies because he said, quote, "I don't leave a job half-finished, and I hadn't finished protecting him yet." Richard sat with that sentence for a long time. He realized that for 3 years, a man had been willing to die for him, and he hadn't even known his daughter's name. When Daniel was released from the hospital, Richard didn't just give him a bonus and move on, the way wealthy men in his position often do. He restructured Daniel's role entirely. Better hours, guaranteed time with his family, a support team so Daniel was never operating alone and unnoticed again. He personally funded his daughter's education. And he made sure that every single person on his staff, from the executives to the security team, understood exactly what Daniel had done that night. But the biggest change wasn't in Daniel's life. It was in Richard's. Richard began actually seeing the people around him, his drivers, his assistants, his security staff, not as invisible parts of a machine that made his life comfortable, but as human beings with families, with stories, with sacrifices most people never see. He started greeting people by name, asking about their lives, remembering the small things. Because one night, in the space of 4 seconds, he learned the most expensive lesson of his life for free, that money can build empires, but it cannot buy loyalty, and it certainly cannot buy someone willing to stand between you and death. This story isn't really about a billionaire, and it isn't really about a bodyguard. It's about a truth that applies to every single one of us, no matter how much or how little we have. We live surrounded by people whose value we don't fully see, until the moment we're forced to. The coworker who quietly covers for you. The friend who shows up at 2 a.m. without asking why. The family member who has stood beside you longer than you've ever noticed. Richard Hale had everything money could buy, but the most valuable thing in his life was standing 2 steps behind him the entire time, unnoticed, unnamed in his mind, until it almost cost that man his life to prove it. The lesson is simple, but it's easy to forget. Real protection, real loyalty, and real love rarely come with recognition. They come quietly, they come consistently, and they are usually only noticed in the one moment they're truly tested. So maybe the real question this story leaves us with isn't, what would you do to protect the people you love? It's, do you actually see the people who would do anything to protect you? So let's bring it all together. A billionaire named Richard Hale built an empire, but almost lost his life in 4 seconds outside a parking garage. The one thing that saved him wasn't his money, his fame, or his power. It was a quiet, loyal bodyguard named Daniel Cross, a man he had walked past 1,000 times without truly seeing. That night changed both of their lives. Daniel got his family back. Richard got something even rarer, a second chance to become a better man, and the wisdom to finally see the people around him. If this story taught you anything today, let it be this: appreciate the quiet people in your life. The ones who show up. The ones who stay. The ones who would stand between you and danger without asking for anything in return. Don't wait for a crisis to notice who truly has your back. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life inspired stories every single week. Drop a comment below and tell us, who in your life is your Daniel Cross? The quiet protector you may not have thanked enough? Thank you for watching. Stay loyal, stay grateful, and I'll see you in the next story.